Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of The Raid 2, an Indonesian action movie from 2014 that was directed by Gareth Evans, and stars Iko Uwais, Arifin Putra, and Oka Antara. Now I recently reviewed The Raid from 2011, so I had to review the sequel, of course. Now my memories of seeing The Raid 2 are pretty strong. I happened to be in New York City the weekend it premiered, so I took a little mini vacation to eat some great food and then marathon this movie. I saw it 8 times in 4 days, and then I saw it 2 more times in the theater when it came to a cinema in my local town here. So yes, I've seen this movie 10 times in the cinema and a bunch more times on home media over the years. Now, like the original movie, this sequel is one of my favorite action movies of all time. So the story follows the events of its predecessor. After surviving the apartment building raid, Rama, played by Iko Uwais, goes undercover, first inside of prison and then outside on the streets, to take down an Indonesian crime syndicate, as well as the cops that are in league with them. And this Indonesian syndicate is currently feuding, or they will be feuding, with an invasive Japanese yakuza clan in Jakarta. So when I originally heard about the premise for The Raid 2, the online articles back in the day that were covering its pre-production phase seemed to really emphasize the prison setting. So I originally assumed that this would simply be a carbon copy of The Raid, but instead of an apartment complex, it's set inside of a prison for the whole film. Thankfully, I was completely wrong in that assumption. So our protagonist is in prison for a very limited period of time at the beginning of the film. So the vast majority of the story takes place outside of jail. And that's a good thing, because this avoids being a carbon copy and instead it's tasked with expanding the story. Now, it eventually came out in interviews that The Raid 2 is the movie that Gareth Evans originally wanted to make in the first place, and the title was Barandal, I think. But he failed to secure the funding, so instead of just sitting around, he decided to make The Raid as a backup plan, since it had a smaller budget. So in some ways, the original Raid movie was kind of a Plan B project that was retrofitted into being a prequel for Barandal, which eventually became The Raid 2. Which was, really interesting that this was actually the true passion project that was set out from day one. And that's one of the reasons why these movies feel different from each other. From the very beginning, they were always intended to be different. So The Raid 2 is more plot-heavy, with a focus on gangster conflicts and dynamics as it greatly expands the universe that the first film was set in. Now, I've always felt that despite the praise this movie gets online, and it does get a lot of praise, I still think that the story is stronger than most people think. There is some genuine plotting and character development here. I really like some of the supporting characters especially, and many of them get their chances to shine. I also like the father-son dynamic between Ucok and Bangung, because you get that conflict between the son, who's kind of hot-headed and impulsive, and the father, who keeps cool under pressure. And Bangun has to be one of the more likable gang bosses in recent cinematic history, because he's like the quintessential underworld businessman. He tries to avoid conflict, maximize profits, that type of thing. So, these are pretty good characters here. And then we have Eka, who is kind of underdeveloped early on, but he completely steals the show during the second half, during that badass car chase. And there is some brief references to his past. You could kind of fill in the blanks and read between the lines, piece some things together as to, his backstory as well. So it's pretty good stuff here. And, there is a lot of detail to the characters that will make repeat viewings a lot of fun. So, for example, if you pay attention to the visual associations with Bejo, the guy with the cane, he's very directly associated with cooler temperatures throughout the film. So when he calls Ucok in the nightclub, you can see Ucok's breath as he's talking to him on the phone. And that's one of Bejo's kind of character traits. It's something you might see it's got a little bit of like a comic book flair to it too in that type of aspect. It gets a little bit unrealistic in those aspects, but it sets it up. Like, for example, his association with cooler temperatures, it escalates to the point of exaggeration during the snowfall scene later in the film, which I've heard people complain about. It's like, it doesn't snow in Jakarta, but, the director uses it as a visual presentation and expression of this guy's, coldness psychologically. So you gotta, pay attention to stuff like that when you're watching this, and it makes, like I said, the repeat viewings more fulfilling. We do have a pretty fantastic cast, and I became fans of some actors because of this movie. I mean, Oka Antara, Arifin Putra, and Tio Pakusadewo are 3 examples. And we've seen those guys in other films, actually before and after this. And we have some smaller roles for some recognizable Japanese actors like Kenichi Endo, Ryuhei Matsuda, and Kazuki Kitamura. And even some actors who I was already familiar with took things to the next level and really impressed me. So when I first read the cast list for this, I was surprised to see Julia Estelle in this action movie. I was already a fan of hers from the Kuntilanak trilogy and the Mo Brothers film Macabre, but highly choreographed action movies are kind of a different beast. So I was excited to see her in the movie, but I was curious as to how she would come off in it, and she delivered. Apparently she walked around with these hammers at home while preparing for her role. She brought them to the gym with her when she worked out. And during the beginning stages of her 6-month stamina and martial arts training, she worked out to the point of actually vomiting. So she hit the gym hard early, and it kind of displayed a dedication to this role. And she's really good in this. And nowadays, she's actually known internationally as being like an action star instead of a horror star, which is something that I did not see coming 10 years ago. Because she was definitely more of like a horror star in her home country there. So it's been very interesting following this girl's career over the years. So the Raid 2, I would say, is legitimately good acting in it. It also has good tech and specs, as they like to say. Good cinematography, effective editing. There's some interesting editing during the beginning moments as well. And the overall quality of the film is impressive for your typical action movie. And we haven't even talked about the action yet. So the fighting really is kind of like the main draw of this film because it's so good. It's basically a ballet of death with an incredible variety of expertly crafted action scenes that, for the most part, have a pretty grounded, realistic feel to them, at least in terms of the physics. Action design is also expanded from the first film. You get the shootouts and the martial arts again, but now you get some car-based violence, which happens multiple times in the film, including the highlight car chase shootout. The choreography here, some of the best I've seen in recent memory. Gareth Evans took, for example, 3 months to choreograph and video storyboard the final kitchen fight. Just for that one fight, it took him 3 months. So, and the reason why they had this much time was because they had trouble funding the film. So while I was sitting around waiting for, someone to give them the money to make it, they're like, well, let's just, fine-tune the choreography while we're waiting. So it actually benefited the movie. It's kind of a blessing in disguise, because it gave them excessive amounts of prep time for the fights. So I think, and I'm calling this now, I think it's going to be difficult for anyone associated with this movie to top the kitchen fight in this film. I don't know if Gareth Evans will ever direct a fight as good as that ever again. I don't know if Iko will ever be in a fight as good as that ever again. You know what I mean? So it's kind of an all-time classic scene. Some other action highlights are the 2-on-1 hallway fight with baseball Batman and Hammer Girl. I like the car garage warehouse fight that precedes the finale. Like when Rama crashes through into that garage storeroom area. I think that's a kind of an underrated fight in this film. And then the assassin montage, when the crap really hits the fan, is really good. And then you have the car chase. I mean, there's so much awesome stuff in this movie. And then you have the prison fight. It's really good stuff. So when you think about it, though, the gory violence is kind of a big screw you to PG-13 action films. And the $4.5 million budget is an even bigger screw you to the big mega budget Hollywood blockbuster action flicks. So you basically have, one of the greatest action movies of all time having a $4.5 million budget in 2014 dollars, folks. Like, that's crazy. And they still had trouble funding the film. So, I mean, it's unbelievable. So, if you have not seen The Raid 2, you gotta watch it. It's available streaming and on physical media. Just do a double feature if you haven't seen these. Watch the first one and then the second one right after. And as always, we will see you next time.